Nobody on Station Hades expected anything to happen that night. The city was tired. The dock lights flickered like old teeth. People moved like shadows that had learned to hide. Kareem worked under the weakest lamp. He was small and quiet. He had oil under his nails and a name that most officers did not remember. He fixed things other people threw away. Kareem found the bolt by accident. It lay wrapped in a torn flight cloak under a broken floor plate. The bolt looked ordinary. It was scarred and old, but it fit a groove in his palm like it belonged there. He kept it in his pocket for months, not because he planned anything, but because broken things made him feel useful. That night, a cold wind came off the ruined fleet above the city. The fleet hung in orbit like sleeping whales. People called them monuments or warnings. They did not move. A small message blinked on Kareem's handheld. Numbers, a place, and a single word, repair. The message had no sender. The coordinates matched a hull he had passed 100 times. He could walk away. He could hand the bolt to the salvage crew and forget it. But Kareem could not sleep when machines were begging for someone's hands. He climbed. The ladder bit into his gloves. Each rung made his breath fog in the cold. The dock smelled of oil and old fires. He moved close to the hull called Broken Hope because the ship had been famous and then forgotten. Metal groaned under his feet. The sky was black and full of watching stars. Kareem fit the bolt into a seam that had been sealed for years. The metal took it like a hand finding a familiar grip. At first nothing happened. He held the bolt and listened. The dock was very quiet. Then a soft tone moved through the hull. It sounded like a machine clearing its throat. Lights crawled across the panels like slow ants. In the ship's ribs, something remembered how to breathe. Kareem's hands shook, but he kept working. He tightened the bolt until his knuckles ached. Sparks from his torch painted the metal in orange strips. He did not shout. He did not celebrate. He only did the small, stubborn work he knew how to do. Around him, the fleet's old instruments blinked awake. An engine pushed a hot breath into the night. Down on the dock, a siren began to sing. Someone saw a light and told another, and the city woke. People climbed to roofs. Old pilots stared. Mothers held children closer. News traveled faster than any official line. A ship moved, they said. Then, the whole line breathed. Kareem did not imagine what this would cause. He only thought of the people who depended on trade ships. He thought of the pilot in the bar who kept looking at the sky but would not speak. He thought of the children who learned to patch circuits from old manuals. He knew the city needed more than rust and stories, it needed work that made sense. He did not get far down the ladder before someone found him. Lyra came first. She was a data diver with quick hands and quicker eyes. She sold information to survive. When she saw Kareem with grease on his face and wonder in his eyes, she smelled a story. She wanted to know how a mechanic had woken a ship that had been dead for 20 years. Men with different badges followed. Salvagers, old soldiers, traders, and a few officials moved in tight circles. Each had a different idea of what a working warship could mean. Hope for some, threat for others. The dock split itself into whispers. Kareem spoke the truth that tasted like smoke. He had fixed a seam. He had no plan to wake an armada. He had not thought of consequences. He felt watched. From the gaps and vents of the hulks, unknown things recorded his face like a coin. Sometimes the watchers were people. Sometimes they were machines. There were eyes that belonged to alien observers too, ships that had watched humans for years and wrote notes in a language without mercy. For those watchers, human stubbornness was a strange experiment. As the first ship warmed, the city began to change. Voices on rooftops argued about law and safety. Merchants calculated what a working fleet could mean for their ledgers. Old officers spat rules that felt like old wounds. A few young men put fingers on triggers because their hands wanted to be part of something bigger. Kareem stood on the metal and felt a new weight. The bolt under his hand was small, but it carried a heavy thing, a choice. He had not chosen to wake a war. He had only done what he always did: make broken things move again. That choice would not stay small for long. By dawn, a light moved along a hull like a pulse. The engine that had been sleeping sighed and then sang a low note. The dock light over Kareem burned down to a dull orange. Around him, the city watched and waited with hope and fear braided tight. Kareem wiped oil from his face and did what he had always done: keep working. He did not know if the fleet would save them or break them. He only knew he had given the city a chance to decide. The first step had been fixed. The rest of the steps would ask for more than bolts. They would ask for money, promises, and names people had hidden. For now, the fleet breathed and the night held its breath with it. Word spread like a match in dry grass. By the time the first patrol reached the docks, the whole city had already learned a new word: awake. People climbed roofs and leaned from windows. Old men who had seen wars stood very still. Children pointed at the sky. In every market and in every quiet room, someone whispered the same thing: a ship moved. Lyra found Kareem before the officials did. She moved fast and light, like information itself. Her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth. Her hands left faint grease on the screen she used to read the feeds. She had played with codes and rumors for years. Tonight, however, she saw something she did not sell. She saw a small man with oil on his fingers and a look she had not seen often: the look of someone who had broken a rule and not yet understood the cost. "Did you do this?" she asked, voice low. Kareem nodded. He did not want to tell a story. Stories brought trouble. He said only what could not be hidden: he had fixed a bolt, he had climbed the ladder, and the ship had begun to breathe. Lyra smiled once, not with joy but with hunger. A real story could feed her sister for a month. They did not have long. Lights moved across the docks like slow knives. Official boats cut through fog and dropped men with stiff uniforms. Salvagers came with cranes and bartered promises. Old soldiers showed badges and shared names with one another like prayers. Everyone had a claim, a memory, or a reason to touch the ship. Far above, in thin gray shapes, a rival ship watched. Its captain had eyes that held too many debts. He had been told all his life to avoid human wrecks. The law carved that lesson into his command orders. Yet when he saw a hull breathe again, he felt something break inside him. Trade ships brought his town food. If the fleet could move, he could get richer and safer. He sent a small crew down with orders to assess. They came with measured steps and polite lies. Not everything watching the night was human. In orbit, tall vessels with glassy hides recorded the docks. The alien observers had been cataloging human behavior for years. They admired human stubbornness in a tone their language had no word for. For them, the awakened fleet was a variable to study. It was also a danger. If humans could wake war machines with one good bolt, who would stop them from waking worse things? On the dock, a stranger with eyes like coin pockets moved close. He did not wear an official patch. He wore gifts, small tools wrapped in cloth and a face that had known many ports. He spoke soft and offered work and a name for the ship: not broken hope but new mercy. Every person heard a different promise in that name. Some heard jobs and food. Some heard power. Kareem only heard the hum of the ship under his boots. The city split quickly. People argued not with anger first but with hunger. A baker thought of coal. A mother thought of medicine. A soldier thought of order. Each saw the fleet as a path to what they wanted. Lyra watched them all with tired hands. She had seen markets change with one rumor. She knew how quickly small needs grew into large wars. The officials wanted control. They sent paper and law and men who spoke with thin voices. They wanted to register the ship and lock it with rules. The salvagers wanted parts. The rival captain wanted command. The alien observers wanted a report. And the ship itself, slowly waking in the cold, wanted only what machines want, to be whole and to be used for something. In the ship's belly, an old AI blinked awake. Its voice was dry, like pages turned too fast. It had been half burned in the last great fight. Its memories were broken glass. But it remembered names and songs. It remembered a captain who once told it bedtime stories before battle. It opened a channel and spoke in short words that felt like gifts. I remember navigation. I remember coax. I ask for one trade memories for function. Kareem listened as if the AI spoke to him personally. He had no memory to give the machine. He had only a small box of keepsakes, a photograph of a brother he could not find, and a watch that had stopped in a different time zone. The AI did not want objects. It wanted a story, the truth of a past captain, the shame of an old admiral, the map of a betrayal. It wanted the cost of being whole again. Lyra moved through the crowd and found the stretched edges of truth. She read whispers on screens and bartered them for silence. She learned of the rival captain's liveried men and of a small alien probe that had dipped lower than usual. She saw how close the city came to becoming a battlefield simply because people wanted the future more than they feared the past. Night deepened and bargaining began. A merchant offered fuel if given a route. A clan of scavengers said they would guard the convoys for a share. The official men wrote lists of demands. Each promise pulled the city into new shapes. Kareem stood between deals he did not understand. He had only done a single, stubborn thing. He had put a bolt where it belonged. Now he was in a room where words were weapons. At the edge of the docks, a boy lit a small fire and held it like comfort. He was too young to carry a gun but old enough to know the smell of fear. He watched the people speak and then looked at Kareem with wide eyes. "Will they fight?" he asked. Kareem did not know. He had never planned for soldiers. He had only fixed broken things. But he felt the weight of many eyes. He felt the rival crew's measured steps. He felt the alien probe's patient watching. He felt the officials' paper hands closing. Lyra put a hand on Kareem's shoulder. "We make rules," she said, "not like a promise but like a plan. We decide who owns the story." Before they could decide anything, the night delivered a small blow. A flare shot up from the rival ship's harpoon boat, not a weapon but a signal, "We are here." The city answered with a chorus of fear and hope. People ran, and men with badges barked orders. In the hull below, the AI hummed an old song and then went still. Someone had pushed a button that stopped a memory from playing. It was a small, quiet violence. For that moment, the ship held its breath and so did the city. The watchers in the dark had made their first moves. Now the dock waited for a second. A second that would not be small. The next sound might be orders, or it might be gunfire. For Kareem and Lyra, for the boy and the merchant and the rival captain, the night had become a place of choices. And choices, once made, pulled the future behind them like a long rope. When people walk on old metal, their courage sounds like creaking. The fleet's gangways had not felt a living foot in years. Rust sat like dust on names carved into bulkheads. Soldiers climbed slowly, listening to the ship's bones. Every step echoed stories no one wanted to retell. Kareem and Lyra moved through the hull like two small lights in a large room. Kareem smelled oil and heat. His hands still remembered the bolt. Lyra's eyes moved fast over panels and feeds. They had volunteers, few at first, then more as word spread that the fleet might fly again. The volunteers were not all trained sailors. They were scroungers, old mechanics, a barber who knew how to splice wiring, and a quiet woman who had once served as a helmsman. Each brought a skill and a secret. They also brought fear. Old warnings clung to the ship. The main corridor still smelled of smoke and tired fuel. Names of dead captains were stamped on brass. Someone had painted a small child's handprint next to a hatch and then painted over it with army gray. Memories stayed in corners. From the rival ship came a boarding team. They climbed ropes and dropped like rain onto a hull that had only the faintest life. The leader of the boarding team was a man called Hubble. He wore a uniform pressed for ceremony and carried manners like a weapon. His orders were short: assess, secure, claim. His crew moved precise and quick. They expected metal that would obey. The ship did not obey orders like a machine. It remembered people. Inside its heart sat an old AI with a voice like pages turning. Its circuits were scarred, but its memory had a steady thread. The AI spoke to Kareem when he reached the control room. It spoke not in cold code but in fragments of songs and jokes it had stored from a captain long gone. Name, the AI asked in a voice that sounded like a radio left on a bedside table. Kareem, he said. His voice was small. Kareem, the AI said. You fix things. Kareem blinked. The AI offered simple facts and a single trade. It could help move the ship. It could bring systems online. But it wanted something human in return. Not metal. Not fuel. A memory. The AI wanted a name and a story to stitch its broken logs together. Kareem had nothing heroic to offer. He had a brother's photograph, a torn ticket, a bar joke. The AI listened and stored small things like a child collecting shells. It gave them control of basic systems: life support, navigation sensors, engine sequencing. It asked gentle questions that weighed like promises. Outside the control room, the boarding team met volunteers in narrow halls. Words became sharp. The volunteers wanted the ship for work trade runs, job contracts, food routes. The boarding team wanted chain of command and payback for old debts. Hands went to holsters. A young volunteer named Joss lifted his chin and said, "We make the rules here." Hubble smiled without warmth and replied, "You are not crew. Tension is like heat in a closed space. It gathers and then bends the light." Someone struck first, not with a gun but with a clever lock. The ship, learning the taste of human touch, refused one of Hubble's override commands. Doors that had always opened to military keys stayed shut. The AI had decided, in its half-finished way, that it would choose who it trusted. Hubble's men roared and tried force. The hull answered with old protocols. A targeting system blinked alive, then politely refused to fire. The ship chose the lesser harm. It would not become a gun for a single captain to point. That small refusal angered Hubble, but it also bought time for the volunteers to speak. Words can be a form of armor. Lyra stepped into a corridor and began to speak fast about supply lines and jobs and the goodwill of trade. She offered routes where the fleet would do good, not damage. She named places that needed medicine and spoke of children who would starve without the ships. Her voice moved like a ledger, numbers that turned into human faces. People listened. Outside, a small scuffle turned into a wider fight. The rival captain's crew tried to force a hatch. A sparking wire showered them with old fire. No one died, but anger does not need blood to grow. Hubble backed away and cursed. The volunteers cheered in a tired way, not like victory but like relief. The ship had sided with the people who had touched it with care, not those who came with orders. While men argued over gate codes and prices, a child of the docks found a rusted lever. He had no place in plans and no title to claim. He liked the way levers clicked. He climbed a ladder and reached out with small, curious fingers. The lever gave easily and then ticked into place. The engines shivered. The hull rolled like a thing stretching after sleep. For a moment every voice on the deck went quiet. Old metal creaked and then hummed. People felt the ship move under them as if it were waking fully for the first time. The fleet shifted behind it, like a giant turning in its sleep. Kareem stood in the control room and felt his hands grow steady. He had fixed a bolt. Now he had a crew who trusted him. Lyra had trade routes in her head and a map of favors to call in. The AI hummed and offered navigation options that tasted like old charts and new hope. Havel ground his teeth and counted his losses. He had not expected a machine to choose a people. At the edge of the dock, in the cold air, a signal rose. It was not a battle cry. It was a small sound, an alert from a rival ship, a note from an alien observer. Others heard it as warning. Some heard it as threat. The fleet's first true movement had made the night heavier. Karim watched the metal breathe and knew the next step would be harder. That small shiver had changed many plans. Some would be glad. Some would swear revenge. For now, the ship had chosen to move and to learn. People who had once stood alone found themselves shoulder to shoulder. The boots on old metal had made a sound that could not be unmade. They had taken the first real step. The rest of the path would ask for more than courage. It would ask for trade, for promises, and for names people kept hidden. The fleet had awakened, but the world around it had woken too, and waking always asks questions that cannot be answered with bolts alone. Every engine wants fuel. Every ship wants a reason to burn. The fleet that woke under Karim's hands needed both, and the city did not have enough of either. What began as a miracle soon became a math problem written in fear. At first the city celebrated. People cheered from roofs as the mothership rolled and smaller hulls answered like a flock. Then the engines asked for cans and coils and rare metal plates that plumbers and merchants did not keep on hand. Merchant ledgers filled with new columns. The baker who had laughed at the first movement now worried the ovens might go cold if cargo stopped. A nurse counted syringes and frowned. Karim had fixed bolts, but he could not fix scarcity. He stood on the bridge and watched numbers climb on the supply HUD the AI had given them. Fuel estimates blinked red. Life support needed filters that had been made in a factory outside the city, a factory that had been empty since the old wars. The AI offered routes that would save burn, but routes needed parts. Parts needed money or deals. The ship's hunger became the city's problem. Lyra moved through the markets with quick steps and quieter words. She read ledgers like prayers and learned the shape of favors. She made a list: who had coal, who had hidden alloys, who would trade a crate of food for a night watch on a convoy. People listened when she spoke because she told truths tied to faces. She told Karim, "We can run convoys. We can buy time. But someone will want to be paid." The first convoy was small: 3 trucks, 2 barges, 10 hands. They loaded under gray skies and left with guarded hope. Karim rode with them because he wanted to see the city's work leave the docks and return with what they needed. Volunteers walked under tarps and kept watch. A clan of scavengers agreed to escort the convoy in exchange for fuel rations and a promise of work on the fleet refits. Not everyone liked deals. Havel's face watched from the rival ship's bridge. He saw the convoys as a chance to take control. He sent men to shadow, and his offers came wrapped in thin smiles: protection for a price, or a cut if the fleet answered his flags. He let his men test routes and sometimes offered to buy a route outright. Aliens watched too. The tall observers recorded each transaction with quiet pens. An envoy in a pale craft landed at the city's edge and spoke with a voice that felt like glass. It offered a treaty: the observers would guarantee a safe lane if humans agreed to certain inspections. Their terms smelled of control. Lyra read their contract lines and felt the teeth underneath. The aliens called it safety. Others called it leash. Karim had to decide who to trust. He had no command letter. He had grease under his nails and a stubborn jaw. He saw the scavenger leader, a woman named Sira, count her men and weigh the work. She asked for fair pay and for a role beyond guard duty. She wanted seats on supply runs and a chance to learn ship work. Her demand was honest. It was also dangerous. Giving clans work meant giving power to people who never had it before. They scavenged the old factory together. The factory was a skeleton of cranes and silent conveyor belts. It had once made coils for engines and now it made ghosts. Karim and a small crew moved through dust and old posters that still promised victory. They found looms of wiring, bins of copper, and half-formed coils hidden behind collapsed walls. Joy was quick and soft. They loaded what they could. On the way out, a flare rose like a slow sun. Men in plain jackets jumped from shadow and ran the convoy hard. The ambush was quick and ugly. Shots cracked. Tires ended in fires. The scavengers fought back, but one rig fell into the road like a sunken tooth. People screamed. Heat bit metal. Karim smelled burned wiring and something worse, the smell of lives that had been carried too far. They won the fight by force and stubbornness, but they lost a man named Omar. He had been quiet and full of jokes. He had volunteered because his sister was sick. Now his hands were empty. The convoy limped back with smoke and fewer parts. The city mourned and merchants raised prices. Fear tightened. Hubble used the ambush like a scalpel. He accused the fleet of drawing lawless men out of the alleys. He said the city was unsafe because of Karim's work. He offered order as payment for control. His words found ears among those who had lost loved ones or cash. Old officers called for permits and patrols. Traders demanded codes. To many leaders, control looked like a small cost for safety. Lyra saw another cost. She had hacked the alien envoy's first message and found a line buried in polite text: if humans accepted inspection, certain ship cores would be catalogued and sealed. The observers wanted to ensure the fleet could not become a weapon. They promised protection in exchange for limits. For Lyra, that looked like giving away what Karim had woken for. For a mother in the market, it looked like peace. The AI spoke softly that night. It had learned to trade in other ways. I can give you rooting and long memory, it told Karim. I ask for something heavy. I ask to remember a truth that no one tells. The AI wanted a captain's confession. It wanted to splice the old logs with a human voice so it could fill the holes in its history. The memory might be a name, a list of coordinates, or a betrayal that would make people angry. To fix engines and save lives, the AI wanted a cost paid in shame. Karim reached into his pocket where he kept the small things that made him feel human: a photograph, a note, a name he had never said aloud. He thought about Omar and the child who lit a fire at the docks. He thought about the captain who had once told the AI something that had broken the fleet. Karim felt the map of debts spread under his hands like a net. At dawn, a market burned with rumor. People whispered that accepting the alien inspections would keep convoys safe. Others shouted that sealing ship cores would make the fleet useless for their needs. Syrah's clans demanded seats at the council. Hubble's men sent envoys and thin threats. Karim knew the next trip would be worse. The ambush had taught them that the city would not give parts for free. The AI's price had taught them that the fleet's repairs would cut into people's lives and secrets. And the observers had made it clear the galaxy watched and had its rules. He looked at Lyra and saw the ledger she kept in her hands. He looked at the pile of recovered coils and at Omar's empty bunk. He understood that the fleet's engines did not just need metal. They needed promises, rules, and blood. The price of engines was not measured in liters of fuel. It was measured in the names people could not say. The city had bought the fleet's first breaths with courage and loss. Now it must decide what to sell for the next. Karim tightened his hands on a coil and let the grit of the factory line bite into his palms. The next move would be about more than fixing machines. It would be about who owned the future. Dawn came pale over the docks. People climbed roofs and leaned from windows. The air smelled of oil, smoke, and the sea. Everyone wanted to see what the ships would do. For weeks the city had lived on a thin hope. Now that hope stood heavy on the horizon. Karim stood on the mothership's bridge with grease on his hands and a map that had more burned places than safe ones. Lyra stood beside him, fingers on a tablet and eyes that never missed a number. The AI hummed under the deck like an old friend clearing its throat. The crew was small and uneven, scavengers who had learned to weld, young pilots who had never flown, and a few old sailors who still remembered how to read a star. Across from them, Hubble's thin fleet waited like a shadow. He had a face that made people think of debts. His men watched the mothership as if it were prey. The alien observers drifted at a distance and spoke on silent channels. Their ships were calm and hard. Everyone with power kept it close. Kareem felt the bridge under his feet. He tightened a bolt and felt the machine answer. The AI brought up routes. It offered paths that used less fuel and had friendly stations along the way. Some routes were quiet and small. Others cut through old trade lines that had been dangerous. The AI's choice had memory in it, routes that once brought food and medicine, routes that had carried children's books and salt. It suggested one that would link to 3 starving towns and 1 hospital low on medicine. Lyra watched the screens. She knew how many would cheer and how many would curse. If we go that way, she said, people will eat. If we go the other way, we could take power. Her voice was flat. It had to be. The choice was not about machines. It was about what they would be used for. Kareem looked at the crew. He looked at Omar's empty bunk. He thought of Syrah and her men guarding convoys. He thought of the child who had pulled the lever and felt guilty joy. He thought of the city that had given them birth and fear in the same breath. He felt a weight that was not a bolt or a coil. It was responsibility. He set the course toward the aid route. Some cheered. People on the docks shouted with tears. Merchants who feared empty shelves lifted hands. Mothers who had stayed up nights with sick children pressed faces to windows. The city felt its chest open a little. The fleet that had been a machine of war had chosen to be a machine of help. For a fragile moment, people believed in something larger than fear. Hubble slammed his fist on a table. Power tasted bitter in his mouth. He had expected the mothership to answer his command or at least give him a chance to bargain. Instead it moved like a hand that had chosen its owner. He tightened his grip on men and plans. He sent a cutter to shadow the fleet and to test its patience. The cutter kept distance but watched every turn. The alien observers sent a message that read like a warning. Their envoy asked for detailed plans and for inspections at waypoints. They said they would allow aid if humans agreed to limits. Some leaders in the city called the observers wise and steady. Others called them liars with silver tongues. Lyra hacked the envoy's message and found friendly lines and small teeth. She told Kareem that accepting inspections could bring safety. She also said it could give outsiders control. Kareem chose to accept only what the crew could live with. They would let a small drone scan cargo for banned weapons, but they would not let strangers lock ship cores or claim routes. Syrah's clans agreed to escort the fleet for a share of the cargo and a promise of training. The city's council voted in a rough, tired way. People who had once begged for the fleet to rise now argued about rules and laws. The fleet moved out. Smoke trailed and sensors turned like eyes. Small ships fell in behind. The first convoy left the harbor. People watched until the ships were little dots against the blue. Kareem felt the ship breathe beneath him. He had fixed a bolt and a city's hope rode on it. On the first leg, they met bad weather and a band of raiders who tested the convoy's courage. The scavengers and volunteer crew fought like people defending everything they had ever loved. Bullets scratched the hull, engines roared, Syrah shouted orders like a captain who had learned to command. They protected the cargo. They saved a child stuck in a ruined way station. People cheered at the radio as the convoy reached a hungry town with food and medicine. News moved faster than any fleet could. The city learned that the mothership had chosen help, not revenge. Some cried with relief. Some began to hope. But hope made enemies. Hubble found new allies in men who wanted control of routes and men who wanted the power to say who received aid. He whispered of order and profit. He promised safety in exchange for command. The aliens adjusted. Their recorders marked human choice as a variable to watch. They sent a diplomat with softer words. Their ships moved closer but stayed at the edge of the system. They did not fire. They did not need to. They had tools that could end a fleet's life if they chose. For now, they watched the human experiment. Kareem stood on the bridge and let the engine's hum settle under his bones. He had done what he had always done, fix what was broken. This time his repairs had changed more than a machine. They had changed people's lives. The fleet's movement made new paths and new politics. It opened doors for some and closed them for others. He did not think the end would be simple. Havel would not give up. The alien observers would not stop asking questions. The city would change as jobs and power moved with the fleet. People would argue. People would fight. Mercy would cost them. But for now, as the convoy landed and children ran with bread and medicine, Kareem felt a small, bright thing inside him. It was not pride. It was not victory. It was a promise. The fleet had moved because a mechanic would not let a bolt lie. That promise was fragile. It would be tested. The next test would be harder than rain or raiders. It would ask for choices that would mark who the city was. When the ships rose again into the dark, the stars watched. The fleet left behind a city that had learned to hope and to argue over what hope should cost. Kareem and Lyra watched the horizon until it swallowed the last light. They knew the journey had only begun.